Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
It's too slanted. That's true. Yeah, don't worry about it.
All right.
You drink it.
I'll drink it.
Greg, great to see you.
Hey,
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It was
See you.
enjoyable. Yeah. Yeah, good.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
We've been able to get to a good place where a lot of folks, especially leadership, is very excited across the agency about the potential. And now we're just hard at work to identify some of those high impact areas where we could solve some problems to kind of demonstrate that with the right approach and process, we can actually start making some meaningful change.
I mean, a lot of what we're doing with our digital modernization is a part of our broader strategy from a health perspective to put healthcare into the hands of veterans increasingly where they are, and access to health data and information and the ability to transact with us.
The goal of the new VA.gov platform is to quickly connect our customers with the services that they come to the VA for.
We want to give the best care and the best services to the veteran. But as IT and even the cybersecurity, we don't always get to see the faces of the veteran. We have to make sure our business partners have the tools that they need to provide that care in an efficient way.
If you look at VA.gov today, it looks very, very different. And that's because our team has used tools and methods around human-centered design and Agile and DevOps. And the main thing is we've gone out and talked to veterans about what do they want, how do they use the site, and how can we make it a more user-friendly site.
However, we can go ahead and adapt those vehicles to make them the best, the quickest, the cheapest. Whoever prevails there will be the leader.
13% of our veterans received at least a portion of their care through virtual care. We're really excited about seeing that continued expansion of how we reach patients and also how we can operate more efficiently as an integrated national health system.
VA has long sort of been a leader in providing patients access to their own data. We see the next wave of that being even more powerful. Empowering veterans to use their own health information in new ways is something that we're really excited about.
All right, good morning and welcome to our Veterans Digital Transformation Breakfast. My name is Michael Hoffman and I'm the president of GovernmentCIO Media and Research. GovernmentCIO Media and Research is the online destination for thought leadership and research focused on the transformation of government IT. Our experienced team collects the best practices in research regarding the advancing technology and management landscape. On behalf of my team, I want to thank you for choosing to spend your morning with us. We're excited about the agenda and speakers we have lined up for you this morning, to include U.S. Senator John Boozman, VA Deputy Secretary James Byrne, VA Assistant Secretary and Chief Information Officer, Jim Jaffer, and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Dominic Cusat, along with other prominent VA leaders, especially in the OIT space. The Department of Veterans Affairs is in the midst of its third most significant transformation. The first followed the Civil War when President Lincoln opened veterans' homes. The second followed World War II with the creation of the GI Bill. The third is occurring right here today with a focus on customer service, Secretary Robert Wilkie's top priority. That focus on customer service has resulted in a digital modernization strategy that has transformed a department supporting more than 19 million veterans. And that's why this morning, the week before Veterans Day, we wanted to focus on digital transformation. The digital transformation happening right now at the department. We have a lot of very important attendees at the event, not only on the agenda, but also in the audience. We have such a great group of folks from veteran service organizations, the VA, industry, academia, everyone. So thank you so much for everyone coming. There are three people, though, I did want to point out, three people that you sometimes don't get as much recognition as maybe they should. For those three people are Kara Vericchio, Contracting Officer at the Technology Acquisition Center, Candice Mazzetta, Contract Specialist at the TAC, and James Cozzolino, Product Strategist for Project Special Forces. The reason we wanted to point them out is because the VA's Technology Acquisition Center uses innovative acquisition techniques which enable the veterans' digital experience, and these three are paving the way with the increased use of demos, creative outside-the-box thinking, and true digital service acquisition techniques. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. Before we move on, I would like to mention we're live streaming this morning's forum. So everyone who's tuning in, good morning. We hope everyone in this room and watching from home can be part of the conversation by posting your comments and questions with the hashtag VeteransCX. And with that, we have such a packed lineup. Let's begin. We're excited to kick things off with U.S. Senator John Boozman, senior member of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee and chairman of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and related agencies. He will be joined by GovernmentCIO Senior Vice President Mega Chachki. Senator Boozman is the son of an Air Force Master Sergeant. He learned firsthand the sacrifices and dedication required by the men and women who serve in our armed forces. As a public servant, Senator Boozman has been committed to improving the quality of life for both our veterans and their families. He has authored provisions to extend successful federal homeless veterans programs, expand treatments for our wounded warriors, and modernize the educational benefits under the GI Bill. So we could think of no better person to kick off our morning than to have Senator Boozman join us. Senator Mega, could you please join me on stage? All right. Thank you very much.
If you can, just one more seat. Thank you. All righty. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Megha Chakshi, Senior Vice President for Veterans Affairs with GovernmentCIO. Welcome, Senator Boozman, and thank you for taking the time this morning.
Well, thank you for having me, and congratulations on a standing room only crowd. This is great. I can't think of a better subject.
Yes, absolutely. I believe this topic is extremely important to everyone present in this room. So thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy morning and being here. VA is undergoing a significant transformation, and this change has been made possible from the inside as well as the outside through a collaborative effort between the Congress, Veterans Affairs, veteran service organizations, many of whom are present over here, and the private sector, many of which are represented over here as well. So, Senator, can you share a few thoughts about your impression on the VA's transformation? In your opinion, do you think we have capitalized on the opportunities that have been in front of us to significantly change the veteran experience?
I think the VA is doing a tremendous job in a number of different areas, and it's all across the board. When you look at the wait times for people trying to get their benefits, we've shortened that dramatically. The IT system that we're in the process of putting in is so important. And so it's really been a collaborative effort. First of all, the American public realizing that these aren't give-me's, these are earned benefits. And I think as somebody whose dad was in the military, growing up in that situation, I don't think we've ever had a time in our history, in my history anyway, that there wasn't more support for the veteran. So it's a good time, and it's a lot of people working together. Certainly this is an area we hear a lot about, all of the stuff that goes on to Washington. We're not getting anything done. We've done a tremendous amount for veterans in the last few years, and then also in a very bipartisan way, which is so very important. So I'm pleased with the progress that we've made. We've got a lot still to do, but we're moving in the right direction.
So, like you mentioned, IT is very important, and we believe that it's one of the key components for delivering a seamless and effective customer service and customer experience for the veterans. How is Congress working with VA to improve its IT and deliver better products?
Well, Congress is working very hard. We are committing a tremendous amount of money in that effort. We've spent a lot of money in the past, and to be honest, I don't know that we've really gotten as much bang for the buck as we would like. That's changing. One of the things that I was in the House for 9 years. This is my second term in the Senate, and so being on the VA committee the entire time. Now I'm in a little unusual situation. I'm on the VA committee and then chairing the subcommittee on appropriations, so seeing it from both sides. But there really is a committed effort right now to spend the dollars that we need, and then also provide the oversight, helping the VA get this done. And we're spending about $16 billion, making it such that the VA and DOD can talk to each other. We chose, or the VA chose DOD, the same people to do both, so that there should be great interoperability. $16 billion, to put that into perspective, an aircraft carrier costs about $13 billion. So this is a tremendous amount of money over the next 10 years. And again, both sides, Republicans and Democrats, are committed to making sure that at the end of the day, that we have a good product. Going to be rolling it out in the Northwest, probably a little bit delayed right now. That's okay. Our message to the VA is, let's do this right. And we want to, as we roll out, we don't want a rocky start. We want a good start. And so again, I think things are moving on track, and we're going to work hard to make sure that they are on track.
Very nice. So you have also been a very big supporter of the Mission Act. And as part of the Mission Act implementation, VA rolled out the Community Care Program earlier this summer. And there's still a lot of work to be done, but everyone's very committed within the department as well as its partners. So from your perspective, how is the implementation of the Mission Act going?
I think the Mission Act is going very well. And I was very concerned. I didn't think it would go well, based on the fact that as we roll out these huge government programs, in the past they haven't gone well. And it doesn't matter if it's the VA or various other aspects of healthcare. VA is a huge agency. You're talking about lots of people. You're talking about a significant change in programs, but it is going well. The feedback that I've gotten back from the providers and the veterans has been good so far. We're 4 or 5 months into this now, collecting a lot of data. And so I think pretty soon we'll be able to determine who's using it, some of the glitches in the program, and then we can improve from there. I can tell you, in fact, I was thinking about a community this morning as I was coming over here, a little community in Arkansas, tucked away in the hills, about a 3-hour drive to the closest VA, around windy, curvy roads. Most of the individuals that need this type of care tend to be elderly and dependent on somebody to take them, or dangerously taking themselves. But it's made it such that those individuals now, again, are able to seek care in their own community without doing that. And that's done a couple different things. It's been so much easier on the veterans. What it does, though, is it also decreases emergency room care, things like that, because the veterans are getting taken care of in a timely fashion. And when you're facing a 3-hour drive, you simply can't do that many times. So I think we're moving in the right direction. So far, I've been pretty pleased. Nice. It's still early, though. And again, we are going to, I can tell you, as the chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee, and then my counterpart, Senator Schatz, we can truthfully say that we're spending a lot of money, making sure that they've got the resources that they need. And the VA is pretty good. I think we're doing a good job of communicating with each other about what the resources are that we're going to need. And as we take this data that we've gotten, over this 5 months, it'll help us better. But right now, I think we're providing the resources, and again, it's still early, but right now it's on track.
Like you said, together
Pleasantly
we will make
surprised.
it happen, right?
Yeah.
Right. Moving on to beyond VA healthcare, there's VA benefits as
Yes.
well, and that plays a significant amount. We always kind of talk about VA healthcare a lot. It's very important to the veterans and their family, their caregivers, but at the same time, benefits on the other side is equally important. And there have been some challenges, but VBA has been moving forward, making some significant reforms and transformation. Cold-Marie was one thing that you had brought up, last year that was a challenge, and you had mentioned that, it was not going as well as you thought it should have been. So where do you think VA is right now? Because there have been some definite steps that VBA and OINT have taken together to make that change happen.
They have, and I think we can be proud of the fact that when we look at the wait time for veterans benefits, that's being reduced dramatically. From several 100,000 down to about 40,000, I think now. Some of the people, the experts, that are fighting that on a daily basis can give us a better tally of that later. One of the concerns that we have, again, and we're providing the funding is that to many of your all's credit that have worked so hard, the VSOs, the other agencies that have really pushed hard, we've been able to make it such that the Blue Water Navy veterans are eligible for care. And you don't think about that, but there's concern, and to their credit, the VA has thought about it. What we don't want to do is those people come forward with their claims, that we get back, with a several 100,000 backlog that not only makes it such that they have to wait, but it crowds out other people also waiting. And so the VA has asked for extra workers and things like that, which again, we're going to provide the funding for. So I think also in regard to the benefit package, we're moving in the right direction. It's just a constant battle. One thing that we're seeing with benefits, and again, we can get the people that are the experts fighting this battle on a daily basis, but the claims now are more complicated. And so, it's kind of claims within a claim. And so the IT program there is doing well. We're able to do much more of that, not by hand like we used to, but also is in a situation where we can move forward. And I think we'll get more efficient as we go forward. We are going to get more efficient because myself and others are going to press hard to make sure that we do that.
Well, thank you for that, though. And
Really
it's, yes, I agree that, in this world of digitization, it's very important that there's enough of technology that's put in place that makes it easier for the VA to process the claims behind the scenes and really pay more focus on dealing with the veterans on a one-to-one basis and let the technology do the behind-the-scenes work. That personal touch is just so important. And that itself is very important when you have to deal with veterans that are going through some significant challenges themselves, like PTSD, and other health challenges that they may have caught on during their time in war. One of the big things that we've always heard about, and we think it's a major crisis, is veteran suicide rate. you have said that this is a crisis that, Congress has been trying to mitigate for a while. You've given a lot of money, but we are still not there yet. And with that, you have said that you've actually introduced a bill called the Improve Wellbeing for Veterans Act. And I read that Secretary Wilkie basically said that this is key to unlocking the veteran crisis, suicide crisis. So can you tell us a little bit more about your push for this legislation?
Well, we do appreciate Secretary Wilkie's support, and this is a huge issue. About 20 veterans a day commit suicide. The problem is, and Jeff Miller's around here somewhere, one of my old, he's the former, there he is back there, he's former chair of the House Veterans Committee. He and I came in at the same time, sat together for 9 years. The trouble is that we've heard that same statistic year after year. So we have 20 a day. We've quadrupled the amount of money that we're spending on the issue. So it's not like we're not putting resources forward, but we don't have the bang for the buck that we'd like, in reducing that number. Now, the problem is 14 of those 20 don't have contact with the VA. So we can't blame the VA in the sense that if you're not coming in contact with them, we can probably blame them a little bit in the sense of outreach and things like that. But again, there's so many that aren't coming in contact. So what we're trying to do is really do a program much like we've done with veterans homelessness. In Little Rock, Arkansas, it was almost at a crisis level. In fact, it was at a crisis level. Now they've made it such that on paper there's very little veterans homelessness. And the reason being is basically the VA just got the community together, the NGOs, the nonprofits, and said, look, we need help. And, how can you help us solve this problem? And to their credit, the community, the veteran service organizations, the other nonprofits stepped forward and helped and provided the key. So what we're trying to do with this bill is say, look, we want to put metrics in place. We want to measure what works, what doesn't work. But we also, in doing that, want non-traditional providers to step forward in the sense of not working with the VA in the past, to give them little grants to help them so that we can identify these 14, provide them services, and actually provide some services there, but get them grafted into the VA where we can provide a lot more services. And so it's a common sense thing. The VA does a great job. Veteran service organizations have the heart, and they can be very, very helpful. What we're trying to do is harness them. What we're doing now is not working. We've got to think outside the box. And there's some great programs out there that are non-affiliated, that are doing a tremendous job, and will be able to broaden their outreach with just a few dollars of help. These organizations generally stretch their dollars so very far. But we're going to measure, and make sure, that we're pushing the money in the right direction. Again, in an effort not to compete with the VA, but to get those 14 that we currently don't have in the system, to get them so that they're aware of the VA, then provide some help, but also get the umbrella of the VA to provide a lot more help. Veterans are blessed right now. There are so many things out there that are available to them, but many of them don't know. Many of them simply are unaware of the tremendous changes that have come about in the last few years even. And so that's really the effort. Senator Warner is my fellow in the Senate that is working hard on this with me, and then we have our counterparts in the House. And any help that you can give us along that line, we would appreciate, because again, I think it's the right direction. What we do have to recognize now is that what we're doing is not working. We've got good measurements, better than ever before. And so in an effort to actually put a dent in those numbers and change them, this is what we're proposing.
Very good. So this is, I'm sure, part of your long-term vision for the VA too. What else, as we close this fireside chat, what else do you, in your opinion, should be the long-term vision for the VA? You know, as a senior member of the Appropriations Committee for Veterans Affairs, as well as, a chairman for the Appropriations Committee for Veterans Affairs and a senior member of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee.
Well, I think that the Veterans Department, like every other department, this is a much different world than it was even 10 years ago. And so we have different technology that's out there. We have an aging veterans population. And then we've got all of these young people that are coming on board also. So as a result of that, we just have to adapt. One of the things that we're working on, in fact, I'm working really hard with Senator Tester on, who's the ranking member of VA on the Senate committee, is making sure that women, there's so many more women that are serving in the military now, and as a result we have all of these women veterans. The VA system was really built, the hospital system and things was bent on a male situation because that was predominantly who was serving. That's not the case anymore. And so that's a good example of how things have changed dramatically, continuing to change, to make sure that as our female veterans are in the VA hospital, some of them doesn't walk up to them and say, "Where's your husband?" Yeah, that's not a good situation. And to their credit, we've made tremendous headway in that regard. But this is something that we still lack, so that's a major thing. But I think there's a lot of other things like that. And certainly with the technology the way it is, it's so much easier to communicate. I'll tell you another story that regarding veteran suicide. I can think of a small community in Arkansas, really not that small, kind of a medium-sized community for Arkansas. They had probably one of the highest veteran suicide rates. We've got lots of veterans in Arkansas, lots of veterans throughout the Midwest and the South, but they had one of the highest veteran suicide rates in the country. And so the VA talked to the VSOs, what can we do, this and that. And essentially, several members, VSO members, just said, we're gonna fix this. And so what they did was get a list of all of the veterans in the area and simply went out and visited them all. Getting them back in. It's just another example of harnessing these groups. But that's the kind of thinking that we've got to have. And the good news is with the technology that we've got, there's lots of emphasis. I was so pleased in the introduction. We talked about the VA being customer friendly. And that's really what it's about. These are service organizations. Again, these aren't give-me's. These are earned benefits. And so, we simply have to have that attitude that, and the good news is, people that work in the VA are doing a good job and have that attitude. And I think it's being reinforced more than ever before, which is a good thing.
We actually have several people in the audience who have supported the Veterans Crisis Line.
Oh,
so I am sure they are heartened to hear about this bill, and we hope that it will make its way through the legislature soon and be approved.
Well, we appreciate that.
And thank you, Senator Boozman. We appreciate your support to the VA and its partners as we transform the way we serve those who have served in the defense of our nation.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and congratulations. Like I said, we've got a standing room crowd on both sides, and that's a real tribute, I think, to people that care so much about our veterans. But we do appreciate you coordinating things.
Thank you. It's
Thank you.
always a pleasure.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Right. Thank you very much, Senator Boozman, and thank you, Mega. So next we have VA Deputy Secretary, the Honorable James Byrne, and VA Assistant Secretary and Chief Information Officer, the Honorable Jim Jaffer, joining us on stage. So thank you. If you guys could take a seat, and we will get started. All right. Before serving as leaders in the VA, Mr. Byrne and Mr. Jaffer shared distinction we were just talking about in the hallway. Both graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and served in the Marine Corps with decorated careers. Along with the Marines, Mr. Byrne focused his career in law. During his career, he served as the Department of Justice International Narcotics Prosecutor, which I thought was interesting, looking at the bio, as well as the General Counsel and Assistant Inspector General for the investigations for the Office of the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction. Before being confirmed as the Deputy Secretary, he served as the VA's General Counsel. As the VA's CIO, Mr. Jaffer leads over 16,000 IT professionals in the Office of Information and Technology during his 28-year career in the Marine Corps, where he served 4 combat tours. A computer science major at the Naval Academy, Mr. Jaffer has centered his career around cybersecurity. The Deputy Secretary and CIO will further discuss how the VA is going through this major transformation that we talked about earlier this morning, and why is it so vital to Americans' veterans. So gentlemen, let's get started. To begin, I was wondering if you could both talk a little bit about the transformation that I talked a little bit about in my opening remarks. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, starting with the Deputy Secretary?
Sure. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me here today. Yes. As you're reading the bio, we've never been introduced together before. Thought that was kind of interesting, at least it was for me. I vaguely remember our classmates, we were in the same class, signing up for the computer science major. And a lot of people going, that's going to be a big nothing burger. Like, what are you doing?
What's that going to do for you?
What's that going to do for you? And so good on you and good on all of you for going down that path, and in particularly you as an infantry officer, staying with it and staying current with all the changes. But you are correct. We are in the midst of, I would say, argue one of the 3 greatest transformations in how we take care of veterans in our nation's history. And hopefully you'll hear a little bit about what's going on today in that transformation as we build the VA for the 21st century, the Veterans Administration that our veterans deserve and the American people expect us to deliver to our veteran population. But to give you some context on what's going on right now, I think it may be best to give you a little historical perspective, if I can, on the 2 other major transformations, which shouldn't really be a big surprise to you, but I'd like to put the context around it if I could. And the first one was when Abraham Lincoln signed legislation that created the homes for disabled volunteer soldiers, and then the next day he charged the nation in one of his speeches to care for those who bore the battle. And that set off our nation's priority of taking care of our veteran populations. And so it's right after the American Civil War, the first facility was built in Togus, Maine, and that was a facility, a building, brick and mortar facility exclusively designed to provide care for our veterans. And as you probably guessed, that has grown into the largest integrated healthcare system in the United States. The second major transformation should be no surprise to you as well, and that's World War II. 16 million men and women are demobilized within a relatively short period of time from the European Pacific theaters. And some, of course, didn't deploy, but they stayed within the United States. And they did great things, right? They liberated Europe, and they put Japan back in a box. And they came back, and there was some, I think, fair pessimism about what was going to happen as a nation with 16 million young men and women who are changed, who are maybe enlightened, but certainly changed, coming back to the United States. And the concern was we were going to go into a depression. You know, we've all probably experienced a recession, but a depression is rock bottom. That's bouncing hard off the bottom, something that none of us in this room have actually seen. So the concern was these veterans were going to come back to a depression, be unemployed, maybe march on Washington. It was a pretty doom and gloom story. And so of those 16 million veterans that were demobilized over a several-month period of time, Omar Bradley was asked by the president to take charge of that situation, right? The VA or Veterans Bureau or whatever we were calling it back then. And he shepherded through some legislation to take care of not only the 780,000 veterans who had physical injuries of war, and of course that doesn't even count the injuries, the hidden injuries of war that we're much more attuned to today. But he created the GI Bill, or he signed in or implemented, the president signed, Congress passed the GI Bill. And you're like, well, that sounds kind of familiar. Well, it is. It's generally the same piece of legislation today with certain modifications that we created back around the end of World War II. And I just want to highlight a little bit about how awesome I think that piece of legislation was. First of all, it took care of the 780,000 wounded service members who came back, some requiring care for the rest of their lives, by their family, by their communities, and in most cases by the government to some degree. And so many brick and mortar facilities, 100 and some odd, were built around the country. But there was a realization with 780,000 veterans that 100 brick and mortar facilities is not going to quite cut it. And so legislation was passed called the Hometown Program of 1945 that allowed veterans to get care wherever they were, out in their community. And for those that sort of track what's going on in the VA, we have something that we call community care right now. And so the whole concept of providing care out in the community to supplement what the Department of Veterans Affairs, or whatever it was called in 45, is not new. And so for those folks who think we're privatizing the VA, we're just not. This is a very consistent behavior, consistent way we've cared for our veterans for decades and decades. The two other pieces of the GI Bill that I think really transformed America were the home loans that allowed these veterans to come back and get a home, zero down, guaranteed home loan, build families, build community, and maybe not go back to where they came from. Nothing wrong with where they came from on the farms and in the inner cities and maybe outside the coal mines and other places, but they had a choice. And the VA, the government, sort of gave them a choice, gave them an investment in allowing them to build these communities. Because these folks didn't come back the same, right? Most people, I would suggest, maybe less so today with the internet and all the interconnectivity, but certainly back then, most folks didn't leave, I would suggest, a 1 or 2 square mile area. But these are folks that were put together with all kinds of different demographics across the United States, forced to get along, accomplish a major mission, and went over and did amazing things. And came back different, very enlightened, educated. And they came back and they took advantage of something you're familiar with, the educational opportunities that our nation invested in them. They said, well, you know what, we're going to give some money for these folks to go back to school. And there were skeptics that said, oh, this is going to be a big waste of money. Well, I can tell you what, I think you would agree, that was not a waste of money. The veterans took advantage of that. Many of them, in fact, millions went to 4-year institutions, colleges that were, before World War II, exclusively preserved for the elites within the United States. Community colleges popped up all over the United States for veterans to sort of refine their skills or their visions or their dreams. And then trade schools became very popular as well. And so, not to belabor that too much, but I already kind of have, I would suggest to you that this investment that our country made during that transformational period following World War II shaped the better half of the 20th century and put us on an economic wave of prosperity that I think we're still riding today. And that sounds sort of dramatic, but I believe it to be really true, that we are truly a superpower within the world today. We have an amazing military, very, very powerful and capable military. But our superpowerness, in my humble opinion, is because of our economic power and size that we have. And so let me skip back, now let me go forward to where we are today. And that's what you want to talk about, is the digital transformation that's going on at the VA right now. And I'll share a couple of the Secretary's priorities and maybe highlight the one of particular interest for this group. You know, customer service, we'll talk about that probably a little bit later, at least in this seminar. But so customer service is number one priority still with the VA. Implementation of the Mission Act, you heard the Senator speak a little bit about that. Suicide prevention, you heard the Senator speak about that too. It's something we talk about every day, and we are trying new things and new ways of addressing that I'm pretty optimistic about, but we can continue to always do better in that area. And then electronic health records modernization. I'm sure there'll be some discussion by the CIO and some other folks on what we're doing with that $16 billion program that Senator Boozman referenced, how it's going to transform healthcare, not just interoperability between us and DoD, but it's going to transform the way our veterans are cared for the rest of their lives, right? Their interoperability with the community is a major force multiplier in all of that. But tied into all that is just the modernization effort, obviously but the modernization effort that's underway at the VA right now. And that is built upon the IT modernization effort that I'm sure Colonel Jaffer will talk about. Everything is connected to IT. Everything goes back to IT in some way in the world today, and certainly within the Department of Veterans Affairs. And so Colonel Jaffer has taken the initiative to essentially support all of these various initiatives that are all ridiculously large, but at the same time modernize the whole IT infrastructure. And so when I say that, I have some appreciation of it. I can tell you if I came from a very disciplined defense contractor before I joined the government, mostly Marine Corps and government time. But I can share with you that the efforts that we have underway at the VA right now, if we were doing 10% of them within this company or any successful company, the whole leadership team would be fired. And so that sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, like, well, my God, what are you doing? We have to do this, right? This is not a proceed with caution, ensure that the profit and loss margins are good and what have you. We have to modernize the VA. It is time to do that. And there's several initiatives in addition to electronic health records modernization. There's the supply chain. We're going to get that right. We purchase, I think it's, how many $1 billion of stuff do we purchase every year? It's 20 something. I should know. We're talking about billions. 26 or 27 billion dollars worth of goods and services every year. And so having that supply chain efficient and accountable is incredibly important. And then transforming the financial management systems that support that purchase and pay for the community care on the services, that pay for the purchasing of these services and material goods. Incredibly important and a big deal for the taxpayer. We have modernization of the appeals that the senator talked about. And I'm missing a couple, but there's about 6 major initiatives that are all landing on sort of the back of Colonel Jaffer and his wonderful team to transform the VA into the VA that the American people expect us to be delivering to our veterans. So I went way over my allotted time. I'm sorry. Just kind of excited about what we're doing, but I also want to deliver the message that it's in the hard category, and I think we have the right team in place to actually succeed and go ahead and move on this.
Mr. Trevor, could you talk a little bit about the IT modernization strategy that you're really taking, your team is really taking under right now to really deliver on this digital transformation that we're going through right now?
I can't miss an opportunity with the movie quote, right? It's like Ving Rhames looking at Tom Cruise and he goes, "We don't call it Mission Hard, we call it Mission Impossible for a reason," right? So, but you know, we're getting it done. I think in terms of the IT thing, maybe just a couple of points to add on to the DepSec. I would tie in historically the coming of the information age, and I think a lot of people in this room were around in the 90s, and you know, if I say Y2K, I'll get some head nods out there, and you know, the tech bubble and, you know, the wild, wild west that was the 90s. I was certainly around for that in government with technology, and we were, you know, you remember the term chasing technology. Fortunately, you know, that doesn't seem to be as much of an issue, although the pace of change, the exponential advance of technology has caused us to differentially serve the business line. I would just say, again, as the DepSec mentioned, there is nothing that doesn't have an IT component in terms of all of our modernization efforts, and you have to look at what we're doing differently within the VA to address that. And you know, this is not your mom or dad's VA anymore. You know, we have to adopt commercial best practices. So to that end, we are going with an OpEx versus a CapEx methodology, right? And that manifests itself with the cloud migration, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. It talks about how we buy services and procure across that $20 billion plus line number. Again, just being very much more agile as a business and agile in terms of development, right? Those are two slightly different things. And so, you know, just when you look at how we're approaching these challenges, I think the only challenge is how do we make sure that we're sufficiently resourced. As you know, we have a centralized appropriation, and so you know, again, looking at the categories of management and how we procure services for the business lines, because otherwise, you know, we have kind of a free candy store mentality, right? And so I think our interoperability with the businesses, you know, I tell people a couple things. One is I wake up every day thinking about 3 people. The DepSec is one of them, by the way. But I also think about the 3 businesses that he and the Secretary of Charge was supporting, Dr. Rich Stone of VHA, Dr. Paul Lawrence in VBA, and Undersecretary Randy Reeves in NCA. And I think as with the DepSec being a veteran, I'm a patient in VHA. I'm a recipient within VBA. We saw Undersecretary Reeves on the way over here, and the only one I'm not trying to join is NCA, right? But of course he looks at me every once in a while and goes, "Don't matter, sooner or later, we're going to get you." So we got that going for us. But again, from an IT perspective, ruthless focus on the business, ruthless discussions with the business. You know, we'll talk a little bit about Mission Act, you know, and as a vignette, you know, nothing like a good crisis to enter in the job. Trying to do about 18 months of commercial development in about 4 months. It kind of gets the blood pumping and focuses the mind. So I think we'll talk about Mission Act. But again, a super large enterprise, as Mike, as we talked about ahead of time, you know, we're you know, just to put it at scale, we are supporting across these 3 very differential business lines a Fortune 10 entity. And so again, trying to be responsive to those needs.
It's incredible. So one of the things we talked about a little bit earlier was customer experience. And that is something that the Deputy Secretary, you're leading the cross-agency priority goal of the President's management agenda. Could you talk a little bit more about that effort of leading that customer experience pursuit across agencies?
So thank you for that question. So in a sense, I lead everything in a certain degree, but we have a wonderful office called the Veterans Experience Office that truly does wake up and think about that every day, measure metrics about how we're performing and taking care of our veterans, and it is the Secretary's #1 priority. The things that we talked about a minute ago, and we'll probably talk more about today, are about this digital transformation for the future VA. But we can't ever take our eye off the ball, that every day we have some living and dying and recovering and things that are going on in the VA with veterans that we can't take our eye off the ball. And so customer service is and should remain our #1 priority to ensure veterans want to come to us, right? But you had asked about across the federal government. There's a presidential management agenda that's out there, and one of those agenda items is customer service. There are essentially 25 agencies that, if you combine them together, they touch just about every American in the United States in some way with some kind of a service. And so VA has been asked to lead that effort. Dr. Linda Davis with the Veterans Experience Office leads that initiative. I get to carry some of the good news for her. When you say lead it, it's, you know, I'm not a puppet, but they prop me up and give me all the good information that they actually do to collaborate with other government agencies. In fact, I think they're partnering with GSA. I think that's our main partner in ensuring that it spreads across the government, commercial best practices, because that drives the profit and line margin numbers for the private industry. And so they have best practices, and so we're adopting a lot of those. Matter of fact, when I leave here, one of the reasons I can't stay around for questions is I'm heading to the meeting of the deputies where we talk about these exact agenda items that we're trying to work across agencies, across the federal government. And so we can improve, obviously, right? And other government agencies that touch American citizens can continue to improve as well. And so we want to collaborate across agencies, bring best practices in from the private sector. And I'm privileged to be a part of that effort.
Fantastic. Colonel Jaffer, you were talking a little bit about the different agencies within the organization, within the department, whether it be the VHA, VBA, and NCA. How do you get those to work together? That's always been a big problem within government sometimes, is the siloing of these different efforts and not working hand in hand. I think there's a phrase out there called shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, I think.
How's that work?
Yeah, I think Dom Cassat's on the next panel, and we were talking about this the other day. We generally try to be Switzerland within the greater context of the United Nations of the VA. But no, in all seriousness, there are opportunities. There is a lot of connectedness. So I'd say the biggest opportunity is our partnership with OEI around our data architecture, our data. So we know the federal data strategy is out there. So I would point to that as like the first main effort we're doing in terms of getting our data architecture right and getting it so that the example I always use is, in the future, how many times should a veteran have to submit their DD-214 in order to get benefits within the VA? What do we think the answer is? The answer is 0. The answer is 0, right? So. And again, much less where we have today, where veterans are having to, multiple times across multiple channels submit proof of service. So, the other area I would point to is our responsibilities around the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act. And so I see a lot of large programs that come in around a lot of technology buys, and I'm always looking for where those efficiencies and where those values can be lifted and shifted across the administrations, or where there's direct connects. So I would say those are two examples where we really try to bring innovation but also efficiency across all three of the administrations and the corporate portfolio as well.
So I appreciate that the CIO's office is Switzerland. I never heard that, but it does make a lot of sense. It falls under me to ensure that the administrations are working well together and sharing data, information, and what have you. And I'm really proud of the fact that we have a pretty robust governance construct that we've set up and we're implementing that you would think maybe we've always had, but unfortunately we have not had that necessarily. There was not as much collaboration in the past. And so we have operational boards that meet every other week to discuss management, tying our priorities into budget. I mean, the normal functioning things that an organization of any size has to do. And there were some growing pains involved with all of that. But we have great leaders that Jim mentioned at the helms of our administrations right now who work together very collaboratively. And they're supported by the staff offices here. So we are functioning like a bureaucracy should. And I know sometimes that's a dirty word, but it is what it is. We are a functioning bureaucracy that I'm proud of the progress that we're making. That's just functioning, right? Yeah. In addition to all the modernization efforts that we talked about before, that we're laying on top of all of that. So good things are happening.
You mentioned the meeting with the deputy secretaries talking about customer experience and going forward with that. Where's the VA stand, in comparison to some of the other departments out there and some of the work that's being done to improve that? Because there's been so many programs, especially over this past year, that we'll talk a little bit more as the program goes on, but it seems like the VA is really pushing forward in that regard.
In customer service you're talking about? Well, we are. I think we've done exceptionally well in that area, and I think we have metrics to support that veterans are choosing to come to the VA maybe more so than they have in the past. And really just because of our size, I think, and because of maybe personality, Dr. Davis is a force of nature in a great way, passionate about what she does. She has an office dedicated to the veteran experience. That White House has recognized that we should be the leaders in all of that. And so we share best practices, we collaborate. These meetings with the deputies are a little more at the strategic level, though we roll up our sleeves a little more than you might think. But Dr. Davis's team is consistently working with agencies that, those 25 that I was talking about, that touch just about every American citizen. Okay.
Colonel Jaffer, enterprise IT is it's such a big area, especially for such a large department such as the VA. Where is enterprise IT right now for the VA, and where do you see the future going?
Well, again, just to give you a feel for the scope, right? We have over 400,000 users. That's not total accounts. About 90,000 medical devices. So you're looking at about 500,000 endpoints across an infrastructure. About 130 cemeteries, over 1,200 medical facilities, and then 56 benefits offices. So really worldwide, predominantly nationally, but we have some overseas locations as well. So when you look at modernizing and supporting that, right? And one thing that we often don't give the right attention to is our workforce, right? And that's attracting and retaining a quality workforce is really first and front and center in terms of a modernization program, right? The other thing too is, we're doubling down on our training. I love the saying I've heard here a couple of years ago. It said, what if we train our people and they leave? What if we don't and they stay? Right? I mean, so I'm going to take the challenge on our workforce that's 60+% veteran to make sure that they have the training, the leadership, the resources they need. I go out to the medical centers, the regional offices, and I see what these ladies and gentlemen, these area managers are doing. So really the people thing is first, right? Because if from an employee engagement standpoint, if we don't make OI&T and the VA a compelling place, and it is from a mission standpoint, if we don't follow through and make it a compelling and valuable employer, then we're not going to take care of our businesses, and the businesses are not going to take care of our veterans, right? It's a pretty simple calculus, at least in my book. Around the greater technical aspects, I know we're at GovCIO here, you want to hear the technical speak, right? We talked about a broader, bringing an operating expenses methodology to the VA, right? So you're seeing us migrating to the cloud. By 2024, we'll have over half of our applications and systems, about 350, in a cloud environment. Probably not 100%, but at least half, maybe a little bit more. We'll see how that goes. But you look at all the benefits of that, and as I constantly stress, it's not about cost savings, it's about business efficiency and effectiveness, right? We have medical systems and other financial systems that are no fail, and they need the redundancy, the geographic failover, and the reliability that the cloud environment can provide. We look at our services that we're providing, software as a service. Again, as we're deploying these in the environment, we're certainly looking at more of low-code and no-code services to get away from these complex interlaid systems. You'll hear Drew Michaelgard, I think, in the panel after next talk about our API strategy, right? So there's kind of a path and a bridge to get us there. You're never there, you're never done. I always chuckle when people said, "Are you done?" It's like, it's never done with IT, right? It's the only thing continuous is change. And so I think we've got a good path from our modernization effort. And again, the big thing that we're looking at is we've got to be responsive to the department and to the business lines. And so all of these things, to include managed services, they're part of the the cacophony, if you will, the total power that we're bringing to the department. And so we are becoming increasingly dependent on our commercial providers. I think we have excellent relationships, and we drive a hard bargain, right? I think that's all part of our modernization.
Can I highlight one thing that Colonel Jaffer said, and that is about our desire, our quest to draw talented people to join the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I will share some good news with you. The Partnership on Public Service conducts a survey every year of the 17 largest agencies in the federal government. And for many, many years, the VA was wrestling with one other agency that I will not mention for number 17 being bad for years and years. But this last year, we're 6, right? And, I never thought we'd be cheering to say we're 6, but when you talk about an improvement from 17 to 6, I'm particularly proud of that. So something good is going on at the VA. I'll just share that with you. And what really matters is that translates into better care, services, and benefits for our veterans, and doing it in a fiscally responsible manner as good stewards of the taxpayer money. So.
Okay. Well, to close, because we're just about running out of time, and we've got to get you to that Deputy Secretary meeting, I was wondering if you guys could both share what you think is going to lead to having this third iteration, this digital transformation being as successful as the first two with the GI Bill and the homes that Lincoln opened. What's going to really lead to success in your mind over the next year or two?
So it's all on your back, by the way. But I will tell you from my perspective, my vantage point, what I think are key elements toward that, and that's just sort of the whole sustainability concept, right? There are leadership changes at the top, administrations, elections, and things along that line. We need to ensure. In fact, we had an off-site leadership meeting about this 2 weeks ago, and the specific topic was we need to ensure that the momentum that we have on this big boulder that we're pushing up the hill, all these transformational efforts, that it is sustained beyond me and beyond Jim and beyond any of anybody, that no one person or no one group is dependent to ensure success. So it's about ensuring the sustainability of the momentum that we have right now. That is incredibly critical. And I think the boulder is a pretty good and kind of an ominous example. It's a very, very big boulder. If we don't keep the momentum going forward, only bad things are going to happen.
Yeah, I think the partnership between the businesses just needs to be maintained, beyond the broader leadership question, which is, of course, essential. I look at our collaboration with our informaticists and Veterans Health. I look at that with our business process folks in VBA and NCA. And again, I'll let them be the judge. I'm probably a little biased. I think it's high functioning, and we just need to kind of build and maintain that. To put it in the historical context again, for those of you that were around during the Wild Wild West of the 90s, right? I mean, you saw endless business cases where they'd say, hey, we can take cost out, we can save FTEs, and it never made it into the back office, right? We never got the funding and the sustainment into the back office. So I have conversations with RPA folks and AI folks and whatever, and these are all capabilities, but I constantly stress to them, to our team, and to the administration, and to the department, to the DepSec in his role as COO, is we have to make sure that we're lifting and shifting those costs and transferring them to the back office, because again, technology, the cute phrase we had in the 90s and the 2000s was, it's an enabler, right? It's a critical requirement, right? Let's just get past that, right? It's a critical requirement. It's something that we have to invest in differentially, and make sure that we sustain it with our business partners.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for joining us. I'd love a round of applause for the two leaders here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, next up, we are going to be joined by two VA leaders. The Deputy Secretary mentioned the Veterans Experience Office, and we happen to have the Deputy Veterans Experience Officer with us, Barbara Morton. So we have both Barbara Morton, who I just mentioned, the Deputy Chief Veterans Experience Officer, if you could join me on stage, as well as Dominic Cusat, the VA Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Information and Technology. So thank you both for joining. So the idea that we had for this morning was really to give a really high-level view with Senator Boozman, and then as well with the CIO and the Deputy Secretary. And what we wanted to do from that point forward is bring on some of the leaders on the ground at the Department of Veterans Affairs, like the leaders to my left here, to talk a little bit more about some of the programs that were going on there. So to give you a little bit more idea of these two folks, Dominic works directly with Colonel Jaffer. Before he was promoted to his current position, he served as the VA's Chief Information Security Officer. So he's those cybersecurity chops as well. Ms. Barbara here has served in the VA since 2006 with a variety of assignments. Before joining the Experience Office, she served as the Director of Management, Planning, and Analysis. So we're really excited to have both of you on stage here. We're talking a little bit about, obviously, veterans experience, customer service, and what's going on with the digital transformation. So I thought for the two of you to kick this panel off, if we could talk a little bit about what customer service means to the two of you and how that applies to the digital transformation. We'll start with you, Barbara.
Ladies first.
The
right?
ladies first, of course.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank
Great
you.
to be here. And I always like to share a story, if I can,
Please.
about how I ended up where I am today, which is in the Veterans Experience Office. So my prior role was in a different group at VA, the Board of Veterans Appeals. And one day I received a phone call from a veteran who was very sort of confused about the appeals process, and took his name, took his number, did some research, and it turns out that we had misplaced his file. At the time it was paper, we're now in digits, which is great. But it took a number of weeks for us to kind of reconstruct it, and each week I would call him and let him know what the status was. And at the end of this journey, I told him we found the file, we rebuilt it, and he gave me the greatest compliment that I've ever received, and that was, "Thank you for helping me. I trust you because I knew you would take care of me." So that's really why I'm here. That's why I'm very passionate about bringing the customer, the voice of the customer, to the center of everything we do in a digital and non-digital space, and building that trust and sharing that empathy with our customers is why I'm here. Yeah. Thanks.
Dominic?
Yeah, and so for me, I came to VA from Department of Defense. I was there for about 12 years, and I was asked if I'd be interested in joining the VA to help with some of the cyber initiatives. And I didn't even hesitate. I said that I would love to do that. My father was a World War II era veteran with the U.S. Navy, and I have 7 uncles, and only 7 uncles, and every single one of them were in the military. Many of them deployed abroad, and they all used the VA services. My whole childhood, I watched them use the services, and I saw the services benefit their lives, and in some instances their families' lives. So it was a kind of a no-brainer for me to come over. And when I left the Pentagon, what I did was everyone I came across in uniform, I said, "I'm going over to VA. What can I do? What would you like to see happening at the VA?" And they said, if you could make my transition from my service years to my veteran years as seamless as possible. I hear all these horror stories about when I transition, the 400 pounds of documents I'm going to have to carry around with me to continue my care. If you could help with that, so that's a seamless experience, that would be wonderful. So I thought, what a great opportunity to help with that. Because I agree, it is all about servicing them as they transition and during their life as a veteran.
Okay. Well, one of the themes that I've heard repeatedly when it comes to the digital transformation in the modernization strategy that's going forward is empathy for the veteran and human-centered design,
Yes.
and incorporating that feedback in the different platforms that are provided to these veterans. Could you both talk a little bit about what that means for both of you in terms of the organizations that you're working with now?
Yeah, absolutely. I can start. I mean, Dom and I were chatting in the green room. Really hardwiring the methodology of human-centered design, which is just obviously a fancy way of saying talk to your customers, understand what their journey is, and design around that, is really sort of a transformation that I think if we can all leave that, that's true legacy, where government now is going to be focused on serving the public first rather than the bureaucracy first. Human-centered design for me has been an incredible practice to get to know in the current business that I'm in, although we sort of applied it on a grassroots level in my former group. But getting out in the field, understanding how veterans need to interact with us in VA, again, whether digital or non-digital space, rather than burdening them with having to figure out our organizational chart is really the goal. So we kind of need to turn ourselves inside out. And with my current office and also with IT, we're totally aligned in terms of that's always got to be the starting point. We've really got to start with the research and understanding the customer journey and then design our services around them.
Yeah, and Barbara and I are definitely of one mind on this. It is such a cool time to be in IT in the VA because we have at our fingertips the ability to directly serve the veteran with really modern digital services, mobile services. We can service veterans in ways they've never been serviced before. And that is where it starts with the veterans. We very much embrace human-centered design principles in IT. Before we start on any project, we're doing user stories, we're interviewing the customers, we're finding out exactly what they need it to do, how they plan to use it, and then we watch them all along the way through user acceptance testing. And our design principles have changed as well so that we can do shorter sprints of quick delivery of capabilities, get that minimum viable capability out there, see how it goes, watch the usage, talk to the users, and then along with the next wave of functionality that we release, we can make some tweaks to make it better serve our customers. And I will mention too, we really view that we have two sets of customers, the veterans of course, but then also the workforce of the VA who are providing services to the veterans. It's very important for us to make it as easy as possible and seamless as possible for the clinicians and the benefits processors and the groundskeepers and property managers of the VA to do their job and get services to the veterans as quickly, efficiently, and effectively as they can.
If I can just add one thing, I mean, in terms of an example of a great partnership between IT and my shop and kind of applying human-centered design principles. So va.gov is a website historically that's looked very corporate, right? Designed very much from the inside out, you know, what we thought might be important. And about a year and a half ago, we partnered with IT and the digital services team. You'll hear from Charles Worthington on the next panel. And really kind of started to rethink, well, veterans want to transact with us here at VA. They've got to navigate all these different websites. Where do they want to go to actually do business with VA? So we did some human-centered design research, and of all the VA websites, va.gov was the strongest brand. So we decided to migrate.
Best URL.
Right, it is, right. So that was great insight, though. So instead of us trying to think about, well, maybe it's this website, maybe it's that website, we decided to migrate all these sort of transactional capabilities for veterans on va.gov, co-designed it with them, so not only with human-centered design, but user acceptance testing, did those agile sprints. And the launch was last year, November 2018, and customer satisfaction with that website has gone up by like 9% in a year. That's a pretty significant jump, and to me, proof positive that when you actually design around the customer, you produce better results for them.
Veterans are voting with their clicks too. I mean, they're what is it, up by, it's up around 10 million now in terms of UVs per month. So really impressive. Charles and his team is going to talk a little bit more in the next panel about that. But and that was one of the, I think one of the reasons we wanted to bring the group together. I mean, it's been almost exactly a year since that was launched, and a great example of where improving the product, improving the process, improves the opportunity for veterans to access those benefits. So I was going to ask a little bit, you mentioned a bit about the sprints and whatnot. I was going to ask about DevOps, Agile DevOps, how that has really improved it as well. A lot of times people think, okay, you know, the VA or any of the agencies, bureaucracy is going to get in the way of keeping up with technology. How has the VA been able to take advantage of those processes and whatnot to deliver technology that is relevant to veterans?
Well, I can start off on that one. So it really has been a change in mindset at the VA, moving from this waterfall approach to developing capabilities and taking 2-3 years to get it out to the field. Where we're starting with human-centered design, figuring out what is the minimum viable capability we can get out there that's useful to our constituency, so they can get their hands on it and start using it and making their lives easier. But a good example of where that's worked recently is with the Mission Act, where we were providing community care for our veterans. We needed to design a decision support tool to help our clinicians figure out, based on the veteran and their health and their medical status and their locality, where they were, what kind of care was out there in the field. We used the DevOps model of Agile to develop very quickly turn around a decision support tool that would be in every medical center, on every end user workstation, and we got that out there and fully user acceptance tested in 5 months from cradle to grave. So we figure this would have taken us about 1.5 years using the previous models. So we were able to significantly cut the time. We were able to meet the June 6th deadline, and we had very few problems with that product because we did that shoulder to shoulder with the VHA. We were meeting daily. We had a joint operations center set up as we were rolling this thing out. Every little problem or glitch that came up, we swarmed on it and got it fixed right away, and then moved on to the next one. So it really showed what teamwork can do, working with the customers, working with the business, providing a good IT sound development principles, that you can end up with a really great product.
If I can also
Sure,
add,
please.
Can I piggyback?
Please.
So to me, that's a wonderful example, and a number of projects that we work on closely with IT is a great example of the blend of using industry best practices and talent and the knowledge that career government employees have in terms of navigating government. So in my shop, we've leveraged partnerships with the United States Digital Services team, with IT, and also the President's Innovation Fellowship.
Okay.
These are industry folks, tech geniuses from all top Google, Amazon backgrounds, who come in, bring those industry best practices for a period of a couple of years. And we, as the career sponsors, are able to help them kind of navigate through, where are the landmines, where do we need to kind of make sure that we're always staying within the moral, ethical, legal boundaries, but where can we sort of help you navigate the system? So to me, leveraging those sort of unconventional assets that are from industry, bringing them in the four corners of government, having them in bed with us, and then having the career staff really help them understand and navigate, to me, that's like the perfect recipe for these wonderful deliverables.
Absolutely. You mentioned some of the personnel and whatnot. How has that changed in terms of recruitment and getting more people to come to want to work with the VA? You mentioned USDS and the Presidential Innovation Fellows, but I know it's been a focus as well for the VA to bring on those folks to make them want to make it a career here at the VA.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll let Dom speak from the IT perspective, but I can tell you from our perspective in terms of bringing in a design element, we are now able to kind of classify position descriptions to bring that talent in, to bring like lead designers and other human-centered designers in as FTE. That's really the goal. We don't necessarily want to always contract that out, because the value is building that capability in-house for a lasting legacy. And frankly, the method of doing business at VA will completely change when we have more of that infused in the four corners of the department.
And we're finding we're able to attract some real talent from the field because we offer these modern design and development principles. We're developing in Agile, we're using safe development practices. We're using full DevOps. We're merging our development and operations offices into one DevOps office. Because we're doing more modern development practices, we have a buy-first approach. We have a cloud-first approach. Doesn't mean everything's going to go in the cloud, but we look there first. It's exciting because it gives and we use the most cutting-edge tools that we can. We'll get our developers what they need to develop in the cloud and develop around these new agile practices, and they do use these tools. We're developing. You wouldn't think that the government would have design centers and dojos, where we've opened one or two of those, and we're looking for some spaces to open some more, where we can have these sort of open concept design studios that are up and coming developers can come and really scrum, and we invite industry into those too. Come scrum with us, come envision where we can go with this. Let's be modern, let's think outside of the box. So this is exciting for young developers and people coming up through the system. And the other thing VA offers is a very exciting subject matter field to work in. Yep. Whether you want to work in health or finance or property management or just back office systems, we do it all, and on a very huge scale. I mean, we're the size of a Fortune 10 or even Fortune 5 company. So this is a really exciting place to kind of earn your chops in IT.
Get some great experience.
Yeah, and on that too, so something Dom said resonated with me. So I think it is a very exciting time to be in government and also tech, just generally in terms of customer experience and the orientation there. And there are a number of drivers in our orbit that are kind of leading us there. So it's not only just sort of personalities and sort of core philosophical beliefs, but there's legislation out there like the IDEA Act, right, which basically says, hey, from a tech perspective, we want to make sure we're doing human-centered design up front to design those technology solutions. So we've got legislation, we've got our secretary, of course, his prime directive. Number one priority is customer experience. I mean, that's incredible. President's management agenda, again, this is a top priority for the administration. So there's so many things going on outside of us, sort of in the orbit, that are helping us to kind of, carry this movement forward. So it's not just a flash in the pan, but it's a permanent sort of way of doing business.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about the feedback that you guys have gotten already from the veterans. One of those things is the trust scores.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the trust scores, how that works,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
where that's gone with veterans?
Yeah, so trust scores, so rewinding in history back in 2014 was a trying time for veterans, of course, and for VA as well, with wait time issues in Phoenix. And so after that happened, that was sort of a signal, I think, to us and new leadership coming in saying, hey, I think we've lost the capability to hear the voice of the customer, because had we had that capability, we might have heard these smoke signals coming up in that facility. So the idea of what is our brand and what is the most important currency that we have, and it's actually something that I mentioned in my opening story, it's trust. It's trust with veterans and their families. So that was sort of the decision made a number of years ago. We've got to fixate on building trust. However we get there, that's got to be our North Star. And so we started measuring trust in VA, again, globally, back in 2015, 2016. And initially, results were kind of in the mid to high 50s range. Today, trust scores stand at 72%, which again, long way to go, but that's a pretty rapid increase over just a few years. So to me, it shows that we're doing something right as an organization. Again, a lot of work to do, a lot more to go, but we are increasing trust overall in VA and across multiple business lines. And that's what we want to hear. We want to hear from veterans, how are you feeling about your experience with VA? And if we can keep that going up, that's our goal.
Go the right way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and from the IT perspective, it is about trust as well. The systems need to be, you have to think about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We need to maintain all of that to keep that trust. And we realize we need to win back some trust. We've had some challenges over the years with IT. We've inherited a very aged infrastructure. There's some systems out there that are 40 years old using programming languages that are 30, 40 years old. So we have a lot knitted together. Some of that knitting is a little fragile. So we do our best to kind of keep that running while we're being innovative under a limited budget. We are seeking ways we can get some additional budget for the VA to do some modernization. That's one of our key goals for 2020 through 2022 is to continue our IT modernization. We want to build a world-class IT backbone infrastructure and have a world-class array of cloud services and capabilities out there for the veterans and the employees to use. So that doesn't come quickly. We need to really thoughtfully design that and approach it. But while we're doing all that, we need to keep the existing infrastructure running because we have very critical missions depending on it.
Okay. Mobile devices, that's not an area where the VA has really made an investment, making it, I mean, everybody has access on the phone, what have you. Dom, if you could start talking a little bit about where that investment's really gone, where design really comes into play there, and just how that's gone so far for the department.
Yeah, no, it's very important, and the demand is clear from our customers that they want more mobile applications and more mobile capabilities. So we've really been looking at, for internal to the VA, the mobile contracts that we have, relooking at those, what kind of services we're getting, what kind of bandwidth and reception we're getting at our remote locations, renegotiating those contracts so that our users have a really good, solid mobile device infrastructure that they can rely on. And then out to the veterans, we're making sure we're developing everything that we develop. We look at, how can we take this to a mobile type capability. You'll hear a little later about the use of APIs to help bridge the data that's in the VA, the vast troves of very valuable data, to applications that will directly benefit our employees and the veterans, many times through mobile device usage. The other big thing we've been working on is telehealth, telemedicine, and even soon to come telehearings, that we want the veterans, 40% of our veterans are in rural communities. It is not easy for them to get to a medical center or benefit center or a hearing site. We need to make sure they're able to, through the technology they have and they own, or technology we can loan them or provide them, that they can get access to these services. They can do video consults. They can do video consults for suicide prevention, psychological consults. We can do the telehearings. We can do benefits consultations. There's no reason they have to come to brick and mortar facilities. So we're really upping the ante on all of our capabilities to support that telehealth future.
And I think the interesting thing too, and what I love seeing in VA, telehealth as a concept, VA is leading the way that way. But we're kind of, we look internally and we're like, well, there's another capability that this could support, telehearings for appeals. So it's the scope and scale that VA has and the ability to kind of look horizontally across business lines to meet similar needs, I think is incredible. And IT has been amazing at sort of threading that across.
Well, how does the Veterans Experience Office work with that? What's some of the feedback that you guys have gotten so far in terms of the interaction with the mobile devices? Because that can be really hard. I mean, just from our perspective of running GovernmentCIO Media and Research, we're always thinking about the design from a mobile, but also that. How do you get from the Experience Office?
I mean, I think this is where partnering so closely with the United States Digital Services team in IT has been so helpful, because their core operating model is our core operating model, which is human-centered design. So the mobile device, kind of being able to access va.gov in a mobile way, mobile-friendly way. I mean, that's how they apply any new requirement. They're always looking at that. So the fact that we're so aligned, again, just is just awesome, incredible.
And I'll highlight too that our veterans community is getting younger. We have a very young face to it with some of our recent conflicts that we've had veterans deployed to. So they're very savvy. They're internet savvy and mobile savvy, and that's their expectation, is that we're going to keep up with the Bank of Americas and the Geicos of the world and provide similar apps to them.
Okay, wonderful. You mentioned shoulder to shoulder a little bit earlier, the Deputy Secretary as well. There's just, again, so many different initiatives going on across these different agencies within the department. How are you balancing, both of you guys balancing that in terms of making sure that they work together?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we have it within IT an account management office, and every business and mission office in the VA, all the administrations and the staff offices have a representative in our account management office, that it's their responsibility to ingest the requirements of the customers and make sure we're building to those requirements. We in IT don't like to build IT for IT's sake. We want to build the stuff that people want, that they need, that they're going to use, and focus our limited resources on that. So the account management office, the AMO office, they're all deputy CIOs in their own right for the administrations, and that is one of the most, if not the most critical function we have in our IT office.
Yeah, and I think from, the Deputy Secretary had mentioned governance, and governance can sound very bureaucratic and a little bit wonky, but I think in any organization you need some way to sort of raise issues and sort of highlight integration opportunities, and governance is the way that we do that. When we do it through a number of different levels, we have a Digital Modernization Council with representation from across all administrations and staff offices, so we're hearing our own internal customers' kind of needs from the employee perspective, the business perspective, fusing that with veteran insights from human-centered design, and then coming up with design solutions in a kind of a technology realm. Any kind of issues that sort of bubble up, or kind of larger enterprise-wide decisions that need to be made, are funneled up through the governance model that the Deputy Secretary talked about. And so I feel like there always are room for improvements, but we've got a very good structure in place to sort of build on and continue to sort of surface what the human-centered design research is showing us, what the customer is telling us, and we're reporting that out now on a regular basis at that level. And I can tell you, having been in VA for about 14 years, having customer experience and customer experience metrics be reported as part of a balanced scorecard is very new. Yeah. Typically, it's been a focus on operational metrics, very important metrics. How many appointments are you scheduling? How many hearings are you holding? Those are all very important for the health of the business. But never before have we had this regular reporting on customer experience. And again, early on in the process, but again, my hope, my dream is that this will be a regular, recurring type of metric to report on, and that we start making business decisions based on experience data.
Okay, excellent. So we're just about out of time, but what I wanted to close is kind of ask the same question that I asked of the Deputy Secretary and the CIO, is for this digital transformation to be successful, what is going to be the most meaningful challenges and roadblocks to get over the next year or two?
I'd say for me, from the IT perspective, three things is our limited resources in terms of budget. We definitely need to relook at the technical debt VA's amassed over the last 10 to 20 years, and it needs to be addressed and turned around so that we can focus on the new projects and the innovative technology, and not just focus on keeping the aging system running. And then the next thing is personnel resources. We don't have enough people to do all the IT we'd like to do. We service all the hospitals and benefit centers and facilities all over the United States. We have a nationwide footprint that takes a lot of manpower, and we don't have enough people to do that. We hear that clearly when we go out to the field, that they could use some more help there, and we could use some more help in the development area as well. And then the third thing is not just getting the talent, but retaining it. We need to make the VA a very rich place to work, a very exciting place to work. It's very hard to compete with the private sector salaries. I know we'll never be able to do so, but we offer so much more than that. One thing I don't have to do in my job is motivate people to come to work every day and excel, because over 60% of our IT employees are veterans themselves. So they are excited to be there, and they're in the fight. So, but we do need to pay attention and make sure they stay with us.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, I mean, for me, it's about, have we reached the tipping point, the cultural tipping point in the department to apply these principles of human-centered design and doing business differently? I think we have. I think if we're not there, we're getting there. Yeah. And so I think we just need time to make sure that we can bake in all these practices, demonstrate results. So for folks who this may feel unfamiliar, to, they start to kind of believe in the power of this methodology and producing better results for veterans.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much to both of you for joining us. Can we get a round of applause for both? Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, our final panel of the day, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, is going to focus even more of a deeper dive here on va.gov, the redesign that occurred there, and how that is going. So who we're going to have for the final panel, it's going to be moderated by our managing editor, Amy Kluber, who can join me here. She'll be joined by Charles Worthington, the Chief Technology Officer for the VA, Andrew Fichter, Product Owner, Lighthouse API Platform, and then Lauren Alexanderson, va.gov Health Product and Design Lead.
I lost my
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, both in person, standing, and also on live stream. Mike introduced the panelists, so I'll just get right into it. We're going to be talking about the va.gov initiative, as well as Atlas and some of the cool things going on with mobile and telehealth. So I want to ask all of you guys, how is technology helping VA improve the veteran healthcare experience? And we can go ahead and start with Charles.
Well, I think that the healthcare experience, something is really changing in the way patients think of healthcare. Healthcare is not something that just happens every couple hours that you visit a doctor and then the rest of your life it's not a thing, right? Increasingly, healthcare is something that we're thinking about more and more. Maybe just by show of hands, who's currently wearing some sort of health-related device like an Apple Watch or a heart rate monitor, some other sort of tracker? There's things like glucometers, sleep trackers. More and more people are taking their healthcare into their own hands. And in the rest of the industry, the use of online technologies, mobile devices, has really changed the way we interact with service providers, and that's definitely happening in the healthcare space. We're lucky to have Lauren here, who has been leading a lot of the work to take advantage of some of these advances to deliver a better digital healthcare experience. So I don't know if, Lauren, you want to talk about some of the specific things we've worked on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charles. Yeah, I think one of the things that has come up a lot in the VA in the last couple of years is really realizing that we need to meet veterans where they are. Healthcare is not, as Charles just alluded to, going to a facility anymore and getting care and leaving and going home. But really, we need to reach out and meet veterans where they are. And that has manifested, of course, in the Mission Act and trying to sort of enable veterans to get care in their community. But it has also manifested in things like telehealth, right? We're expanding rapidly the way that we're delivering care in digital ways. And it's a lot about self-service. How do we enable veterans to do as much of the healthcare, such as scheduling an appointment online or secure messaging their doctor, doing a chat with a doctor to triage a problem before necessarily having to go into an appointment. So we're doing a lot of work in sort of helping veterans navigate the healthcare space, both digitally and then in person as well.
VA has been a leader and is a leader in telehealth. I think last year we did 2.3 million telehealth encounters with nearly 1 million individual patients, and that's one of the biggest numbers you hear of any healthcare provider. We're really looking at a continuum of care, as Lauren said, meeting patients everywhere from a VA hospital, very traditional model, but also increasingly pushing forward with this concept of anywhere to anywhere. So where a clinical provider could be anywhere in the country and they could deliver care to a veteran that is anywhere in the country, and using technology and the internet, make that connection possible. We've also got some cool stuff that's happening in between those things, right? So a lot of people are more comfortable kind of going into a clinical setting, but if you live in somewhere very rural, as over 5 million veterans live in a rural area, there isn't necessarily a clinical setting, certainly not a VA, but maybe not even a good clinical setting anywhere nearby. And so there's a really cool project that our colleagues in the Connected Care office have been pushing forward called the Project Atlas, which is basically repurposing places where veterans are already visiting, things like a VFW post or a Walmart, places that are in their community. We've retrofitted with this sort of personal clinical type experience where a veteran can arrive and have a healthcare appointment in a setting that sort of feels like a doctor's office, but there's no VA staff present except the clinician on the other end of the telehealth screen. So there's some really cool stuff happening across the VA to basically try to meet veterans where they are, and I think that's a huge opportunity using digital to improve healthcare outcomes.
Some of those things might include the decision support tool and things like APIs. Can you go into that a little bit, Andrew?
Yeah, so speaking of meeting veterans where they are, just yesterday it was officially announced the launch of the MVP of the Health API, which integrates with the Apple iPhone Health app. So that allows veterans to see all of their information on the iPhone very easily, like immunizations, procedures, vital signs, conditions. And that's very exciting. We've already had over 3,000 veterans register to see that information. So that's very exciting. And credit to the team here. I know Jason Glanville has done a lot of work. He's led that effort with the Health API. So it was very exciting to see that launch yesterday. And then we also have things, as mentioned, the decision support tool. So we will have API supporting that also to help verify eligibility for veterans to receive community care.
So how is VA leveraging existing technologies? You mentioned telehealth. Can you go into a little bit more about the technologies behind that?
Well, I think the looking for ways to repurpose things we've already built is a key thing that we're focused on in IT. I think Jim and Dom probably both mentioned this, the push to the cloud, the push towards DevOps. Part of that is to try to use the same bits and pieces that we have to deliver one capability to deliver other things as well. So a couple concrete examples of that. The same infrastructure that we're using to deliver telehealth medical appointments, we are expanding to soon be offering video visits for hearings for our Board of Veterans Appeals. And that's something that the board has been very progressive in for a long time. But that same concept of anywhere to anywhere, where a veteran that's got an appeal hearing for their appeal doesn't necessarily have to drive to a regional office to have that hearing, but could instead stay either at their home or somewhere they feel comfortable with an internet connection and talk to their judge and have the hearing virtually. We're delivering those capabilities, working on that, using the same infrastructure that delivers healthcare appointments. And that's, I think, one of the benefits of having this IT capability that's sort of central and shared by all of VA. And certainly the APIs as well, that's another example where the same tools that we're building to support clinician use cases, VA use cases, then can be exposed to third parties that could build things on top of those APIs to better support veterans as well. So it's not just the VA that needs to invest in building these capabilities, but instead we can enable this whole ecosystem of innovators that can build great products on top of what we've already created.
Going off along that, public-private partnerships, they're incredibly important. We hear about that almost on a daily basis. How do industry partners support VA's innovation? Specifically, how have those partnerships driven some of these successes?
Yeah, so I can speak a lot to, we've been doing a lot of work in the benefits space. So trying to streamline the process of veterans applying for and getting a benefits decision. So disability compensation, for example, is a big one. The vast majority of benefits applications are for disability compensation. Right now, that's a weeks-long process to get a decision, and there's many touch points in that process. And we are we're starting to slowly address those touch points. And the one that we've already addressed is at the very front. How does a veteran submit their application to the VA? Before we launched the Benefits Intake API, there was no way for a veteran to, or for VSOs to digitally submit applications to the VA. So with the Benefits Intake API, we've integrated with a lot of veteran service organizations or with software vendors that sell their software to veteran service organizations. And they've been able to integrate with our API and allow veteran service offices to digitally submit applications to the VA. And so that's saved days at the front end of the process. We're also working on addressing later parts of the process too, specifically getting claims into the Veterans Benefits Management System, which is our software that we use to process claims. So right now, once a claim is digitally submitted to VA, it still has to go through processing in the mail portal to get into the Veterans Benefits Management System, and so we're looking at taking that step out too. And so earlier this summer we launched our Claims Establishment API, which will automatically establish disability compensation claims digitally in VBMS, and then save even more time. And so currently we're working with industry partners to integrate with that API.
This is really cool. I mean, something I was very surprised by when I joined was
was basically this stat. I guess, if you had to guess, what percentage do you think of these forms would VA receive as paper or fax? Any guesses? 3 or 4%? Right, and then I think I heard 80%, right? It's closer to 80%, over half. It's something like 60% of disability compensation forms VA currently receives as fax or paper. And of course, it's hard for us to work with that, right? We've got the very first step of the process then becomes, managing this paper, getting it digitized, putting it into our digital systems. But the crazy thing we learned by talking with these veteran service organizations, sort of applying this human-centered design practice, was that a lot of these VSOs that help veterans create their claims, they were using software to create those claims. So, a veteran would walk into an office, the VSO would be helping them develop a claim, they'd be typing it all in, but at the very end of that process, instead of like TurboTax, it's send to the IRS, what their software did was download and print, or download and fax to the VA, because that was the most reliable, easiest way to get the claim to the VA. And so what Andrew's team has done is basically created that TurboTax-like experience for those software vendors, where now at the end of that claim process, they can click a button that says, send this to the VA, and we receive it.
And we human-centered design that we do. So we've been talking to veterans API to address their pain point. One of my favorite actually used to have over a dozen file cabinets because they would be printing out the PDFs, as Charles mentioned, from their software. They would be faxing it to the VA, and then they have to archive it in a file cabinet. One interview subject said that they actually now, and you want to make sure that they're getting quick service. And the more time you're spending standing at a fax machine and printing out paper and filing it, the less you're actually helping veterans. So we've seen great benefits with that.
Great environmental benefits, apparently. So cloud strategy, we hear about that government-wide. How does VA's cloud strategy enhance specifically the veterans' experience?
I would say that it's one of the biggest benefits of using the cloud is the speed at which we can deliver things. And so, the teams that Lauren helps lead are shipping improvements to va.gov literally every business day. We're deploying changes to production every day. And that would really only be possible with some of these emerging technologies that basically let you script out the whole deployment and operations process. And so I think the speed of change is one of the greatest benefits that we get from the cloud. There's also really cool features. When the team is working on a new feature, they can deploy a branch that they're working on with that feature, and it will build the entire application just for that one developer that's working on that branch. So they can see what their new feature looks like on this private little instance of va.gov that was just created based on what they had written. And that would never be possible if we were still working in a traditional sort of data center model where every change had to be kind of manually implemented. It would be far too difficult and expensive to let every developer test out what they were doing on their own private little instance of va.gov. But now we can do that because we have these technologies. So I think that's really enabled the speed. And Lauren, I don't know if you want to talk about the online scheduling work to make that work better, but you've done a lot of work using the cloud to improve the online appointment scheduling process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what we have been trying to do is take out the requirement for veterans to need to hit dead ends. And so we've been sort of working a lot through the online scheduling process. And one of the things that's actually great about the cloud, right, is that we can deploy something and get it tested in front of veterans like tomorrow. So I can get something up and I can get that people actually interacting with a real thing, and that gives me a really good sense of how it's going to work and whether I'm actually delivering software and technology that works well with veterans. It also comes up a lot when we're trying to do things and testing around accessibility and making sure that the products that we're testing, we're not just sort of doing the standard government 508 check, but we're actually really testing with veteran users who are using assistive devices. So we are able to tell for sure that someone using JAWS is actually able to navigate through our website and navigate to log in and all of these different features. And is it not just like it's bare minimum, is it usable? Is it an enjoyable experience for them too? That's a really important process. And the cloud has also enabled us to create a design system that we're able to allow different teams across the VA to use. So if they want to try to, instead of having to reinvent the wheel, what is a button going to look like on every different website? What is a thing going to look like on every different website? We've taken the US web design system and then we've adapted it for the VA's purposes. So done an additional work around making sure that it is extra accessible to veterans, and that we've thought about all of the color contrast and everything, and that is a product that then anyone can go use and sort of adapt the code and be able to apply it to different sites.
And I actually have a direct example of that. Developer.va.gov, we recently launched a redesign of that using the design system, and it looks great. And that's just a perfect example of that in action. I think it looks beautiful. I think it looks on par with some of the better looking websites that you go to.
I think the importance of design can't be overstated, and it's not just making something look nicer. It actually really does have results, and that's something we're very focused on. Is what is the impact of the changes we're making, and so using some of these tactics that Lauren has talked about with the new VA.gov platform, we've really seen the usage of these tools increase, in some cases pretty dramatically. It was 1 year ago today that we launched the new VA.gov, and I think the slide here has a few of the results. But in some ways, these capabilities already existed, but they were hard to find and hard to use. And so by modernizing them, making them easier to use, and making it possible for people to get to them from the single VA.gov front door, we've seen big increases in the usage of these tools. Disability claims, for example, the use of electronic disability claims is up 27% this year compared to the same time last year. And so every disability claim that's submitted to the VA digitally, it avoids that whole paper process to begin with. It gets straight into our systems and it can begin being developed immediately. Pension submissions, burial submissions, all of these things are showing great increases. And one that I'm really excited about is the profile updates. This is a pretty new capability that we've worked on in partnership with the Veteran Experience Office to make it possible for a veteran to basically update their information with the VA in just a single place and have that update go to the whole rest of the VA that needs it. Which sounds pretty simple, but if you can sort of imagine how the VA grew up over the years with each administration creating its own software systems, in many cases, decades ago, those systems were not designed to talk to each other. And so if you updated your mailing address at one VA medical center, it wasn't necessarily the case that mailing address change would make it to your disability compensation, for example. Now there's one system that can kind of synchronize those updates, and we've made it possible for veterans to log in and see what VA has on file for them in terms of their mailing address, their phone number, their email address, and let them change that online. So they can pull up exactly what our staff sees, and they can change it if it's wrong. And you can see we've had over 500,000 people have made an update to their profile, and that feature has grown tremendously. It's almost 5 times more since the VA.gov launch than it was before that. So we've seen a lot, not just, we can just say, it works better, it's better designed, but what really matters is the numbers, and we've seen that work with VA.gov. I think Barbara mentioned probably the most important number is the customer satisfaction score, and we have seen a big increase there. The customer satisfaction score for VA.gov increased by 5 full points, which probably doesn't sound like a lot, but that represents the single biggest increase of a federal agency main webpage over that same time period. So we're seeing the results that tell us that we're on the right track with these enhancements.
Well, on the topic of speed and, of course, the user experience, where does something like 5G come into play in terms of getting that up to speed? And
yeah, I mean, I think that so 5G obviously is just a faster way to get mobile internet. So I think what we're going to see, we're already seeing this, but that will create more demand among our patient population for these highly interactive modalities. So things like telehealth. It'll be a lot easier to do a telehealth appointment if you've got 5G on your mobile device, more reliable. And so what that means for us in IT is we need to make sure that the VA systems and networks are capable of handling this sort of influx of requests from the outside. So I think that's probably the single biggest impact that we'll see to 5G.
what other innovations are you excited about? We heard a bunch already. but with the release of the new iOS app yesterday, that's big news. Is there anything else that is on the horizon, or what work is left to do?
A lot.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's quite a lot to do. There are a bunch of changes coming up in healthcare in the next year, and I think we're doing our best to keep this trend of sort of making sure that veterans are at the center of all of those, and that they are driving that experience. I think one of the changes I'm excited about, though, is actually a change from within of the VA, and that is the idea of really making human-centered design part of every single IT contract, at a part of every single product and project. And I've been teaching a couple of these classes that OIT has been putting on for different staff and sort of piloting, and we test everything. I joke not, right? Like, we even test our own classes and iterate on those and improve on those. But it's a really important point to think about. If every health product, if every digital product across the VA that was veteran facing, or even internal facing but services veterans, right, could be designed with those users, with their feedback, with the outcomes in mind of what we're trying to achieve with that, as opposed to a sort of list of very minuscule requirements. What is the North Star of that application, and how are we delivering on that, and are you making sure that the users of that application are going to use it? I think we're well past the point of where we can say if we build it, they will come. That's not true. Veterans have lots of other options of places that they can go. Users have lots of options of other alternatives of things that they can use. So we have to do our due diligence to make sure that we're delivering on that. And by making VA staff recognize that you yourself as an individual doing product development, doing engineering, doing any role that you have a role in doing user-centered design. You can literally ask your colleagues to look at something. You can ask veterans to look at something and get their feedback and continually improve on it, as opposed to waiting until the day before you launch, flip on the switch, and hope that it works.
Yeah, and as Lauren said, I mean, there's so much there. I mean, just in my experience, even before coming to VA, I mean, I've seen so many tools developed kind of in a backwards way, right? Where you're trying to check a box, you're building requirements, you have this really firm, rigid set of requirements that you're building to, and you're not really designing with the users, and then you release this tool, and then people don't like it. Then they start complaining about it, right? So I mean, doing user research and taking that approach to building products that you know that they'll use, and you're addressing their problems and pain points, is so important. And like on the Lighthouse platform, we have an amazing user experience team that's helped us with that. I mean, I think just over the last couple months, we've done in the magnitude of 10, probably 20 to 30 interviews with users of our APIs, and it's just super helpful and enlightening to see. And the question of what next? What do we do next to innovate? I mean, in an organization as large as the VA, that's a really challenging question to answer. And doing all this user research really helps drive some of those answers, right? I know, like in the benefit space, just through the research we've done, we've kind of been able to answer questions about what to focus on next, what would provide the greatest benefit. So it's been a really fun experience, and I think unique to government, doing this kind of product-minded approach.
Yeah, I think we've got the right team in place to really create. Our goal is to create a world-class digital experience that's on par with anything a veteran would receive interacting with a private sector service provider. And I think in a lot of ways, we've made a ton of progress. VA already, in many ways, leads the industry in terms of healthcare digital experience. So we want to maintain that leadership position. One other kind of focus that I have with wearing the CTO hat is to ensure that we are quickly adopting emerging technologies as they sort of hit mainstream. And so one sort of exciting area I think that we spend a lot of time on is basically the building of models that will allow the creation of artificial intelligence, which sounds a lot like buzzwords, but is basically, I think, the simple way to describe artificial intelligence is increasing what a computer is capable of doing that previously required a human. And we have a few of these small use cases in production today. And so we're trying to make a platform within VA IT that makes it possible for our VA staff members to create these models more easily. But we're already seeing a lot of this, a lot of the promise of this. One partnership we announced last year was with the DeepMind company, part of Google. They just published the results, the first wave of results from that initiative in Nature earlier this summer. And basically they proved that using machine learning against VA's unique medical data, they could create an algorithm that was successful at predicting the onset of acute kidney injury 48 hours before it happened, 90% of the time in the most severe cases. These sort of events, deterioration events, traditional medicine, we focus on kind of treatments, but using these new techniques, new statistical techniques, we're developing new procedures that were not really possible to be created before. So some of these new statistical techniques combined with VA's data, combined with easier access to computing power, I think have the potential to deliver a lot of really exciting advancements in the healthcare industry. And VA is leading in that, and I think we will continue to lead if we're successful.
We are down to our last 30 seconds, but I wanted to open it up to anybody if they had any questions for our panelists.
Well, I mentioned our collaboration with DoD on some of this.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things that we have been doing is, so as part of you might have heard this little thing called Cerner, and it's an effort across both VA and DoD to try to revolutionize how we deliver healthcare and modernize our electronic health records. But what the thing that the DoD and VA partnership together brings is the idea that there's a whole of life experience, right? A veteran is is at one point a service member, or maybe they are in the reserves for a while, and their healthcare documentation lives over there, lives in those set of filing cabinets, and then at some point someone needs to like get a cart and wheel the filing cabinets down the across the bridge and down the street over to the VA, and that experience is a little bit disruptive. And so what we've been working with on the DoD and the VA is to try to make sure that we're creating as much of a seamless experience in the handoff of health records, and so that a veteran will be able to go to one front door, just as they do at va.gov, and be able to get all of their information in one place.
That's all the time we have. Thanks so much. That concludes our programming. We'll be around. I'm sure there's coffee and food, and if these guys can hang out just for a little bit, maybe you guys can tag up with them. So thank you.
All right. Thank you everybody for joining us. Fantastic morning. I hope everybody learned something. I certainly did. Before everybody leaves too, I wanted to share our next event is actually next month on December 5th, just across the way over at the International Spy Museum. The focus that we're going to be doing for that one is going to be AI in RPA. We're going to have quite a few folks from the Department of Veterans Affairs speak on that, along with other agencies. So hopefully you can join us for that as well. But thank you very much, and if we could just have one more round of applause for all the speakers. Thank you.